Hey there, people. So today I am bringing you another episode in my Terraria magic weapons series, my Wands and Staffs guide, covering all wand or staff type magic weapons for all platforms. This will include some of the best mage class weapons. I'll give you the stats, how to get them, crafting recipes where applicable, and which are available on what platforms. So let's start with pre-hard mode, and we'll start with one that's actually only available on the updated platforms. That's the Wand of Sparking. It provides kind of a introduction to magic, if you will. It's a very simple magic weapon that fires a piercing spark, does just 8 damage, 8 base magic damage, and uses only 2 mana. It's not terribly useful, but of course you do get it like right at the beginning of the game on those updated platforms. You can find it in wooden chests near the surface or underground. And yeah, it just shoots this little spark. It has a 50% chance to light your enemies on fire, which is probably one of its most useful features. Basically, you're probably not going to have much mana at that point, so this is kind of more of a secondary weapon. You're not really probably going to get away with using it as your primary, but you can use it to do a little damage, maybe light your enemies on fire, and then switch to something else to sort of finish them off very early in the game. Now, most of these other pre-hard mode weapons are available on all platforms. The first real magic weapons you're likely to get, if you know how, is the ore and gem based staffs that you can craft. There are 6 that are based on ores and gems on all platforms, and then there's one more that's on the updated platforms only. I'll get to that, and that's the only other one actually that's in pre-hard mode that's updated only, but it's just a variant of the others. So basically they shoot a bolt, and it does anywhere from 14 to 23 base damage and uses 3 to 8 mana, depending on the type of weapon, which particular staff it is. And also, as you get to the higher grade ones, if you will, there's an increase in the speed of that projectile and the speed of the firing as well. So most of those are crafted from 10 bars and 8 gems, with one exception, as I mentioned. You know what, I'll talk about that in a second. Let's first show this. So basically, as I say, 10 bars and 8 gems in certain combinations. I'll tell you the combinations. So you can make an amethyst staff, for instance, from 10 copper bars and 8 amethyst. You can make a topaz staff from tin bars and topaz gems, same number. A sapphire staff from silver bars and sapphires. Tungsten, actually an emerald staff from emeralds and tungsten. And ruby staff from rubies and gold. And diamond staff from diamonds and platinum. So just to show you how that works, 10 bars and 8 gems. You do need to use one of those specific combinations. You can craft one of those. So I've got your basic amethyst staff, and that has the lowest stats. That's 14 damage and uses only 3 mana. And you can see fires kind of slow, but you know, this is good enough to be useful early in the game. On the other hand, I already have crafted a mythical diamond staff, which, as you can see, does almost twice as much damage, uses actually more than twice as much mana, but it's far more powerful and fires faster, and bolts even travel faster. So, as you can see, yeah, in fact, I didn't even notice this on the wiki, but that one does pierce one enemy, whereas that one does not, which is interesting. And the one exception I was talking about is the Amber Staff, which is on the updated platforms only. It's just a variant. It's not the most powerful, but it's pretty powerful. It's in the higher end of them, and it's crafted from 15 sturdy fossils and 8 amber. So those are the ones that you can craft, and they're actually quite useful early on in pre-hard mode. But moving along, the Vilethorn, if you're in a corruption world, this projects a spear-like projection, which, as you can see, pierces through enemies a certain number. Actually, it's a certain distance, and does repeated damage to any enemies it hits. So It has 10 base damage and uses 10 mana, so as you can see though, it's going to be useful against like large groups of enemies or worm-like enemies like the Eater of Worlds. So it's very timely if you happen to get that, because you get that from smashing shadow orbs in the corruption. And on the updated platforms only, you can also go fishing for corrupt crates in the corruption if you didn't get it from smashing an orb, or you just want to get it that way. But you can get this on all platforms from smashing shadow orbs. It's a 1 in 5 chance, and it scores up to 7 hits per enemy it hits. So this is actually going to be really useful against the Eater of Worlds, which you're going to fight if you smash enough of those orbs. So that works out well. And yeah, similar idea. In Crimson Worlds, instead you get the Crimson Rod, and that launches a little cloud, which rains on your enemy's parade, and rains this red blood-like stuff, which does constant damage. So this one actually only consumes mana when you cast it, which makes that pretty helpful. It's sort of, again, this is more helpful as like a secondary weapon, but you can use it to do, you know, constant damage. It will launch one cloud, and as you can see, when you relaunch, it'll just basically replace that cloud with another one. And that rain does pierce through enemies, as you can see here as well. And yeah, it's just wherever it hits, it kind of scatters it a bit. Anyway, it does 12 base damage and uses 10 mana to cast it each time. Is a 1 in 4 or 1 in 5, depending whether you're pre-update or post-update chance to drop when smashing Crimson Hearts in the Crimson. And again, on updated platforms only, you can also go fishing for Crimson Crates. Same idea. So those are ones that you can get fairly early, and they're useful in their own ways. But once you get to the dungeon, you can get a magic missile. This fires a projectile. Simple enough. But it's controllable. You can actually hold it at your cursor location, and then you can like fling it in a certain direction, or it'll just travel. If you don't choose a direction, it'll just travel the last direction you were moving. So you can kind of fling that. You can fire it all different directions. You can even like just grab it and hit an enemy with it directly. So it's an interesting mechanic that you can do with the magic missile. It does 23 damage before the update. It's been buffed to 27 damage since the update. Uses 10 mana regardless. It's found in locked gold chests in the dungeon, and again, on updated platforms, you can actually go fishing for golden crates in the dungeon and get it from there as well. But it's available on all platforms from the actual locked chests. Now, same place and same way to find this, the Aqua Scepter. Mine's a weak little damaged one, but it's also found in locked gold chests, and on the updated platforms you can get it from the fishing crates as well. But it's, again, available on all platforms. Fires a piercing water spray, does 15 damage before the update, has been buffed to 16 damage since, uses 6 mana regardless. As you can see, it's kind of an arc, so keep that in mind when you're using it. It's actually reasonably powerful, emits a little bit of light, which can make it useful for other, exploring and so on as well. And yeah, that's also found in the dungeon, same idea as far as finding it as the magic missile. So the next two actually are both found in shadow chests in the underworld. So the Flamelash fires a controllable projectile, much like the magic missile. It's very similar, but more powerful. It does light your enemies on fire, has a chance to do that. And also, though, you'll notice it fires these sparks, which actually makes it very useful for exploring, and particularly if you're looking for like an enchanted sword or a sword shrine. Sword shrine specifically, you can hold this near the ground. Let me just show you that. So it's kind of dark here. Well, not as dark near my glowing armor, or my glowing wings. But there you go. It has this mechanic where it drops these sparks, and that can actually help you see through the ground. But otherwise, similar to the magic missile, but it just does more damage and lights enemies on fire. Anyway, as I say, you can find that in shadow chests in the underworld. And it does 34 damage and uses 16 mana before the update. It's buffed to 40 damage and only 12 mana since the update. And found in the same place, the Flower of Fire. This fires a sort of slow-moving fireball, but as you can see, it bounces actually. Up to 4 times it will bounce and ricochet. And sort of the same thing as far as it lights enemies on fire. Has a chance to do that. And it's a 50% chance. It uses 44, or does 44 damage before the update, uses 17 mana before the update. Since the update, it's been buffed as well to 48 damage and only 15 mana. And again, like the Flamelash, it's found in shadow chests in the underworld. So let's get on to hard mode in one moment. Okay, so hard mode wands and staffs. I'm going to cover the ones that are available on all platforms first, and then we'll get to the ones that are exclusive to the updated platforms and a couple that are PC only. So there are a bunch actually that are, well, most of them are available on all platforms. First of all, the Ice Rod. It auto fires basically blocks of ice, as you can see. So that's quite interesting. You can actually use this to place blocks in midair. You can use it effectively to create yourself a shield. These blocks that are placed, as you can see, after a while they deteriorate. 15 seconds they will stay in place, and you can kind of use that to build yourself a wall. And at the same time, you can still fire through it. If it hits an enemy, obviously it will go through its own blocks. So you can basically use that to create yourself a shield and then fire through that same shield, which gives it an interesting mechanic there. But those blocks are temporary. You can also effectively use that to like build in the sky, because you can create these blocks and then build off of them. You can also like jump on them, and then of course they are ice, so you might want your ice skates or something. But you can actually effectively use that to, you know, get up into the sky and that kind of thing as well, or build up in the sky without having to create like a big thing all the way up from the ground. So it's interesting not just as a weapon, but in some other ways as well. It does 28 damage and uses 6 mana. The blocks, as I say, last 15 seconds. It's purchased from your wizard NPC. That's the purple guy. Mine's over here. This guy. You can purchase it from him for, depending whether you're on the updated platforms or pre-update. Pre-update, it's 1 platinum to buy it. Since the update, it's 50 gold, so it's been halved effectively. And you just buy that one as soon as you have your wizard. So it's a pretty easy one to get once you're in hard mode. But moving right along, the Flower of Frost shoots a slow falling ball of ice, similar to the Flower of Fire. It's very similar, but it's a little bit better because it does more damage, and instead of lighting enemies on fire, it inflicts Frostburn, has a chance to do that. As you can see, it does twice as much damage when that debuff is inflicted versus fire. So it also bounces and ricochets, but it's supposed to bounce higher. Interestingly, I believe the other one bounced off platforms and this one is not, which is interesting. I just want to test that. Yeah, that's interesting. One bounces off platforms, the other does not. But it does bounce off blocks, as you can see there. And it will bounce, it's supposed to bounce higher. As you can see, it hit the ground and bounced all the way up there. So versus the Flower of Fire, it bounces higher but does not bounce off platforms, interestingly. It does, unlike the fire one, travel through liquid. Most of the fire-themed things, most of them will not travel through liquid. This one will. It is a 50% or 1 in 2 chance to inflict that Frostburn debuff on your enemies. It does 50 damage before the update, 55 it's been buffed to since the update, and regardless uses 17 mana, has a 28.5% chance, or a little better than 1 in 4, to drop from ice mimics in the underground snow biome. And yeah, these are all like kind of, there's a lot of ice theme stuff early in hard mode that you can get. The next one is the Frost Staff. This shoots an ice sphere, which pierces through one enemy and will hit a second, as you can see here. And that does 53 damage before the update, 46 damage since the update, uses 14 mana regardless. It is a 1 in 50 chance to drop from either Icy Mermen, Ice Elementals, or Ice Golems in the snow biome, above ground or underground, depending on the enemy and so on. But it's 3 different enemies that it will drop from in the snow biome, but it's only 1 in 50 chance. So moving right along, again, the Rainbow Rod. This is similar to the Magic Missile or the Flamelash in that it fires a controllable projectile, but it's rainbow, so the color of the light keeps changing. And there you go. Similar idea, you can fling that and so on. It is 72 damage before the update, 74 damage since the update. Uses 18 mana, except it uses only 10 on 3DS. On 3DS it uses 10 mana, everywhere else it's 18 mana. It is crafted actually at your hard mode anvil, so your mithril or a kelcum anvil. Before the update you need 30 crystal shards, 4 unicorn horns, 60 pixie dust, 10 souls of light, and 10 souls of sight. On the updated platforms, the requirements have been lowered. It's 10 crystal shards, 2 unicorn horns, 10 pixie dust, and 8 souls of light and 15 souls of sight. So normally you will need to defeat the twins to get this, to get those souls of sight. But on the mobile version, probably for now until the update comes, it can also be dropped by Chaos Elementals. It's a 1 in 10 chance to be dropped by them on the mobile platforms. So otherwise, you'll have to defeat the twins, but of course those can arrive before the twins, so on mobile you can get it earlier. Nimbus Rod, this is an interesting one. It's basically an upgrade to that Crimson Rod that you could get in Crimson Worlds in pre-hard mode. But it can craft or it can spawn up to 2 clouds instead of 1, and of course does more damage. As you can see, drifts a little faster, does more damage. Let's just stop the noise. And those clouds will remain for up to a minute each. Again, they use mana only when you cast, and the rain pierces enemies, as you could see there. It's very good against stationary targets, obviously. It's also good for passively damaging enemies as they pass through. So if you're fighting an invasion or something, or if you're just trying to hold off a few enemies, you can cast those, and as they pass through, they'll be damaged. And it does 36 base damage, uses 10 mana for the cast for each cloud, and it's a 1 in 15 chance to drop from the angry Nimbus enemies that look a little bit like these clouds with a little angry face on them, and little arms, I think, if I recall correctly. And those guys appear when it is raining. So this can actually be very useful against certain things like the lunar pillars, the celestial pillars, which I might show you later. Once those shields are down, you can just, put a couple of these above them and basically just nail them with lots of rain, and it's a good way of taking them down. So that kind of scenario, obviously against bosses and stuff, you can place these around and just kind of hope they go through it and so on. Or if you can trap a boss or something. It can be very useful for certain scenarios. But moving right along, the Poison Staff. This auto fires a little spread of poison fangs, as you can see there. And those inflict the poison debuff. So that's why those guys are getting damaged some more. You can see it also pierces. And that does 44 damage and uses 22 mana. It's a 1 in 40 chance to drop from black recluse spiders in the spider nest. So those are hard mode only spiders. The black recluses can give you this, and not only that, on most platforms except for 3DS, as far as I can tell, you can upgrade that to a Venom Staff. So it is literally an upgrade to that Poison Staff. It fires more projectiles, and instead of poison doing 1 damage per second, it inflicts venom, which does 2, at least against the dummies. So that debuff does double the damage. Again, it's of course dependent on whether your enemy is immune to it. Some of the bosses are. But this Venom Staff does 63 damage and uses 25 mana, so a very slight increase in mana cost. You get a lot more damage. And yeah, I think it fires a little faster as well. But that is crafted. You need to use your Poison Staff and combine it with 14 Chlorophyte bars at your hard mode Mithril or Orichalcum anvil in order to make that. Actually a very useful weapon because of that piercing ability and the debuff and everything against invasions and kind of general use. Maybe you're running around the dungeon, that can be very, very useful. Against bosses that are not immune to venom, which is not that many, but it can be very useful there as well. But let's move along again. So that's all stuff that you can get. Well, the Venom Staff, you'll have to wait until you defeat your mechanical bosses, all 3 of them normally, except again on mobile and 3DS you can get that. Well, you can't get it on 3DS, so on mobile you can get Chlorophyte before that if you find a Drax and a Shadow Chest. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait until you defeat all 3 mechanical bosses to craft the Venom Staff, but you can get the Poison Staff from the beginning of hard mode, so there's your sort of little upgrade path. Get the Poison Staff, upgrade it when you've gotten the Chlorophyte. But moving along, speaking of progression, the Nettle Burst. This you can only get after you've defeated Plantera. It is actually dropped by Plantera. It's a 1 in 7 chance. Fires a vine-like projection, which might look kind of familiar, because basically it's a massive upgrade to the Vilethorn that you get in pre-hard mode from those Shadow Orbs. Yeah, it pierces enemies, and it also inflicts the poison debuff, or it's supposed to be able to as well. Actually, no. I was reading my other notes for the last one. It does not inflict a debuff. It is just like a upgraded Vilethorn, does a lot more damage. Does 25 damage before the update, 28 damage since the update, uses 10 mana on all versions, and it hits instead of up to 7 times like the Vilethorn. This one hits up to 9 times per enemy. Of course, that piercing ability as well. This is going to be very useful in certain situations. And yeah, again, it's 1 in 7 chance drop from Plantera. But moving along again, after you've defeated Plantera, you can also get the Shadowbeam Staff. This is from the dungeon. We'll get to that. It fires an instantaneous piercing purple beam, which, as you can see, actually reflects off of blocks and stuff as well, which is sort of interesting. So if you're in an enclosed space, this is going to like reflect all over the place and kind of fill that with that beam. But it can only hit each enemy once. It does pierce through enemies, but it will only hit each one once per shot. And actually the damage is supposed to be decreased if you fire it very rapidly. Supposedly that damage is decreased a little. I'm not really seeing it a lot though. And it does 55 damage and uses 6 mana before the update. This is actually one that's been, instead of buffed, it's actually been dialed down just a notch. It's reduced to 53 damage and uses 7 mana since the update, so slightly less powerful, slightly more mana. Not a big difference, but enough, I guess. Maybe it was too powerful before. It's a 1 in 20 chance to drop from Necromancers in the dungeon after defeating Plantera, or a 1 in 13 chance if you're in expert mode. And similarly, post-plantera dungeon, the Inferno Fork shoots a fireball which damages plus explodes, so the fireball itself does do some damage, but it's mostly that explosion. It's going to do a whole lot of damage in an area effect. Explodes into a damaging cloud of fire. It does light enemies on fire if they are not immune. I believe it's not even just a chance. I think it actually always does that if they're not immune to being on fire. And that explosion can actually damage right through walls. The projectile itself does not travel through walls, but the explosion can damage through walls, so you can fire it at a wall and damage stuff on the other side. And that explosion, as you can see, hits multiple times, which makes it very, very powerful. It works very well with the Spectre Hood, works well against invasions, and also against multi-part bosses. And the Inferno Fork does 65 damage, is the base damage value. It uses 18 mana, has a 1 in 20 chance to drop from Diabolus in the dungeon after defeating Plantera, and again a 1 in 13 chance in Expert, very similarly. Okay, and one more that you can get in the dungeon after defeating Plantera, the Spectre Staff, which fires, actually this is a homing missile-like projectile, which does 68 damage before the update, 72 damage since the update, uses 11 mana, and again, so here you can see, it is in fact homing. And you can fire that pretty quickly, so this is a pretty useful general purpose sort of weapon. And you can find that in the dungeon. It has a 1 in 20 chance to drop from Ragged Casters after defeating Plantera. Slightly different though in that it's 3 in 40 apparently. Actually, that should be the same. Effectively 1 in 13 in expert mode if my math is correct. Now, a little bit later, Staff of Earth fires a boulder that pierces, bounces, and inflicts damage based on its speed. So it actually will slow down. If I can get one of these rolling slowly. Yeah, see, it slows down, it does less damage. And that bounces around as well. As you can see, bounces off blocks and stuff. Does 45 damage and uses 17 mana before the update. Does 73 damage and uses only 15 mana since. So that's a pretty big buff when you are on the updated platforms. Does roughly double the stated damage when it's at full speed. I wouldn't say exactly double what I'm seeing here, but definitely more when it's running at full speed. And one strategy is to fire downward to guarantee that it actually hits at full speed. Or just be close, I suppose. And yeah, it's a 1 in 8 chance to be dropped by the golem. So you fight the golem, you have a 1 in 8 chance of getting this. You can farm the golem to get it if you really want. Pretty powerful weapon. Does pierce through enemies and so on. Should be quite useful against invasions, especially enemies on the ground. Now, Aqua Scepter. You can actually get this after Plantera, but you're going to need to fight the Pumpkin Moon. This auto-fires homing bats, so kind of a stream of bats. These do home in, but only after a certain distance. So let me just show you that mechanic. So see, they fly like up there a ways, and then they come back down and home, which makes it a little bit less useful in confined spaces, unfortunately. But it is a pretty powerful weapon just the same. And they do not bounce off blocks, so if I fire them at this block, they will just dissipate. It's sort of similar to, sorry, that was something else. Yeah, it is sort of similar to the bee gun and wasp gun. It does 45 damage, uses 3 mana. It is dropped by Pumpkin during the Pumpkin Moon. So yeah, I mean, the bee gun and the wasp gun fire homing bees and homing wasps respectively, so this fires homing bats. It's sort of the Halloween version of that, but it is a little different in that they don't home right away, so that can limit the usefulness a little bit, but certainly could be very useful in certain situations because of that homing ability and fairly reasonably high damage and high rate of fire. So, one last one that is available on all platforms, the Blizzard Staff, and similarly this is from an event. It summons an icicle storm from above. As you can see, is very, very powerful. So if you're on one of the non-updated platforms, this is going to be one of your top weapons. That icicle storm, as you can see, does go through mana quite quickly, so you're going to want some good items to keep your mana. And basically it summons it towards the cursor, so you can control where that is. Now, supposedly it's a little more accurate on PC than it is on console in particular. If you're on console, you can't move your cursor around as much, so it spreads out more to make up for that, which ultimately means a little less powerful targeting ability, but still a very powerful weapon. It does 58 damage, uses 9 mana. It's dropped by the Ice Queen during the Frost Moon, so it's not going to be too easy to get. But I did get this, legit. And so there are 4 hard mode magic staff or wand type weapons that are available only on the updated platforms, on all the updated platforms. First I'm going to talk about is the Crystal Vial Shard. This fires a crystalline projection, very similar to the Vilethorn and the Nettle Burst, but it is available earlier than the Nettle Burst. It's not as powerful as the Nettle Burst, but it's available. It's sort of an in-between version. So you can get it from the beginning of hard mode. Pierces through enemies and blocks like those do, does multiple hits. Not as many as the Nettle Burst. Does 19 damage, uses 13 mana, and it's a 1 in 4 chance to drop from Hallowed Mimics. So if you're a fan of the Vilethorn and you're on an updated platform, you might want to fight those Hallowed Mimics to get one, because basically your Vilethorn's not going to be too useful in hard mode, but this will be just useful enough to kind of keep that going until maybe you can get your Nettle Burst. Now the life drain, this is an interesting one. This you can only get in Crimson Worlds because it's from Crimson Mimics in the Crimson. It fires a stream of projectiles, which, yeah, that's interesting. It says it fires a stream of projectiles, but what I'm seeing is it basically just hits in an area and you get an effect of projectiles back. But those projectiles are not actually what does the effect. The effect is that this heals you. It damages enemies 5 damage per tick, supposedly, and heals you 2.5 life per second. So it's sort of like vampire knives for magic users, but it's not based on damage dealt, and it does not trigger particularly the Spectre armor bonuses. Again, this is available on updated platforms only. It just works differently. It's literally like it sort of like automatically hits damage or enemies in a certain spread. You can see if I point my cursor up, it's sort of this arc up here. If I point my cursor down more, it's an arc down here farther. But it doesn't actually show you where it's hitting. It's just firing these things back at you, which is just to show you that you're getting life from them. Those don't actually give you the life directly. Anyway, point is, it works very well against large groups. As you can see, like I can hit all of these dummies and yeah, I'm going to damage all of them, and I'm going to get maybe more healing. I'm not sure about that. Supposedly it even heals against target dummies. I'm not damaged, so maybe I should get damaged just so I can do that. Come on, bite me, bite me. All right, so I'm damaged. Yeah, it totally works. You can actually use target dummies to heal yourself. So that's interesting. So that is actually something that that's sort of a little trick that you can put target dummies like in your house, so when you respawn you can heal faster. I guess you could put target dummies wherever and use it to heal yourself. But anyway, healing is not based on damage dealt, so you don't really get boosts for that. It presumably will deal more damage if you get some upgrades, but it won't heal you more. Anyway, does 30 damage, uses 10 mana, a 1 in 5 chance to drop from Crimson Mimics. Rather interesting weapon that just kind of works differently than other things. But moving along, Clinger Staff. So that was in, the life drain was in Crimson Worlds, Clinger Staff is in Corruption Worlds. Creates a Cursed Flame wall. Cursed Flame, because I know you all hate me pronouncing it cursed. But anyway, creates literally a little wall, and that damages enemies that touch that wall, also knocks them back, and inflicts the Cursed Inferno debuff. I think that's a chance to inflict the Cursed Inferno debuff. It supposedly lasts up to 45 seconds, or does a certain number of hits. It's good at knocking enemies back, so literally you can use this to create a wall and you know, keep enemies at bay, so to speak. Does 43 damage, uses 40 mana to cast it. It's a 1 in 5 chance to drop from Crimson Mimics. So also interesting, very useful in certain scenarios, kind of like Nimbus Rod and so on as well. Anyway, next one that I'm going to show you is actually crafted. That's the Meteor Staff. And so I've left that spot here blank just so I can show you, because I happen to have the materials kicking around. You craft it from 20 meteorite bars, 10 pixie dust, and 10 souls of light. And here it is, the Meteor Staff. As you can see, does 50 damage and uses 13 mana. So let's go ahead and craft it. And basically this summons a falling meteorite from the sky in the direction of the cursor. So sort of similar mechanic to the Blizzard Staff and that the lunar book thing. I forget the name right now. But yeah, there's a spell tome that you can get from the Moon Lord that has a sort of similar idea as well. This is sort of, I guess, earlier version, because we kind of went backwards to talk about the ones that are on updated platforms only. But you can get this actually right from the beginning of hard mode, so it's actually a very powerful weapon. In fact, all of these last four that are updated only, are all from the beginning of hard mode, and so this can be very useful. You can actually fire this very quickly, and by doing so do a lot more damage, and that makes it very, very powerful. It's not great in enclosed spaces because the meteor can hit blocks and stuff, so it's useful for exploring when you're underground, but you're going to want high ceiling at least. But it is very fast and powerful, which makes it useful against bosses and stuff like that. Again, craftable. 20 meteor bars, 10 pixie dust, 10 souls of light at your hard mode mithril or orichalcum anvil. And that's probably the only thing restricting you from getting it like very early in hard mode. You have to craft a new anvil first. Anyway, there are 2 left, and they are PC only for now. They are both associated with the Old Ones Army event. So the Tome of Infinite Wisdom. This is interesting as well. Auto fires, bursts of 4 page projectiles. They literally look like little pages. And so there's that. But it also has an alternate fire, which summons a tornado that pierces through enemies. So it actually has 2 firing modes, which makes it very interesting. The page projectiles, as you can see there, do not pierce. If I fire those, they will only hit 1 enemy. But the tornado does. And yeah, tornado will not go through walls or blocks, supposedly. I don't know. Kind of seems like it is here, though. Actually goes over that. Does it do the same here? Like if I fire it downward, I used all my mana. But anyway, it does 24 damage is the stated statistic. Uses 20 mana. 1 in 15 chance to drop from the ogre mini boss. Yeah, it seems to prefer to go upward through the blocks, I guess is how that works. So it kind of escapes the blocks instead of going directly through them. That's what it appears to be. Anyway, so it's a 1 in 15 chance to drop from the Ogre mini-boss in the Old Ones Army event, which you'll only see in hard mode. And it's a 1 in 10 chance if you're in expert mode that he will drop that. And last one, the Betsy's Wrath. And this you will need to get all the way to the Tier 3 version of the Old Ones Army event, and you will need to defeat the Betsy boss at the end of that event. It's a 1 in 4 chance that she will drop this. Now this is actually very useful because it fires 3 fireballs that explode on impact. They will arc, as you can see there. They fall after a little distance. But the important thing is what's going on here, the debuff. So they inflict the Betsy's Curse debuff. Betsy's Curse lowers enemy defense by 40 and inflicts that for, this weapon inflicts that for 10 seconds. So basically it's like an upgraded version of Ichor. And you know how useful Ichor is if you've been playing for very long. And I would assume you can use this in combination even with Ichor. So this actually is going to be really, really useful to inflict that debuff, particularly against bosses, to lower their defense, and then probably switch to another weapon because this is reasonable. It does an area effect, as you can see, little explosion there. But generally, it's only going to hit each enemy once or twice maybe. So it's kind of like an upgrade to your Golden Shower, which a lot of Magic users obviously use the Golden Shower and then switch to another weapon. So you can do the same thing with this. In fact, I would assume you can use both because it's a different debuff. So anyway, stated damage is 65 damage, 14 mana it uses each time you fire it, and again, 1 in 4 chance to drop from Betsy. I think this should be very, very useful against bosses, if I were to take a guess. So 1 second, I am going to demonstrate a few of these against, since I'm actually in the lunar events right now, I'll demonstrate it against the lunar pillars. So 1 second, I'm just going to choose a few. All right, I've put on some gear. I've got my nebula armor and some magic accessories. I've got my clairvoyance buff. I'm going to apply some more buffs from my potions. And let's just test some of these out. So that's your Spectre Staff, your basic nice homing weapon there. This is the Venom Staff. Again, different things useful in different situations. Aqua Scepter. This is one of those situations actually where this will be useful because we're in a wide open area with lots of enemies. So we can take those out pretty easily. Blizzard Staff. Doing lots of damage there. I can do my life drain, which is a good time to do that right about now. This is actually going to come in very handy for magic users, I would think. Although I may still want to retreat just for a second to heal up. As you can see, it does not go through walls, which is useful to know. Okay, but yeah, with my Nebula armor boosts, I'm now healing very quickly. So we can get back into it. Meteor Staff. Again, this would be more useful against like bosses, big targets. But it can be very, very powerful against those particularly. Shadowbeam Staff is going to be more useful in confined spaces, although the instantaneous beam can be good if you can aim well. And we'll get our Inferno Fork out. This should be fun. This is going to be useful actually in both situations against both multiple enemies and bosses because of that sort of area effect and all that. Once again, we may want to get a little retreat for a moment here. There we go. Now we got that healing effect going again. And we can test out our Tome of Infinite Wisdom, which is actually reasonably powerful. I'm going to want to get into that secondary fire with this whole group. Hey, you got to know when to hold them. You know, we'll know when to fold them, so on. Now, the interesting thing about this weapon is that you can use, you know, one firing mode and then the other, which I think is very useful. So you can use one to kind of damage a single enemy and then the other to sort of damage the group. I think that's very useful. I think I've got Betsy's Wrath in here. That's mostly going to be useful, though, against the actual pillar. Or any large enemy, I would think. So actually this Bat Scepter comes in really handy in this kind of situation because of that sort of mass spread homing thing, but you do need to be in a reasonably large area for that to be so effective. Anyway, I would guess that this shield should be coming down. Oh, it did come down already. So this is where I wanted to actually demonstrate the Nimbus Rod. I need to deposit that back in my inventory before I die. You can see I don't even know where my cursor is right now. I'm gonna run. Got that weird, you know, effect that those guys do. Ooh. There we go. Now we're back down on solid ground. Yeah, and I think that pillar's been defeated in my absence, actually, which is hilarious. And that's what the Nimbus Rod is good for. Particularly good for. So as you can see, I have defeated that pillar, mostly by just putting the Nimbus Rod above it. And that was the whole idea. So anyway, that's basically kind of what I wanted to demonstrate, different applications of those different weapons. So I hope you liked the video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.